and welcome to the latest edition of Nebraska Football Now. I'm your host, Andy Classen, and I'm joined again by our Husker insider, Jake Bartecki. Jake, how are we doing?
We're doing well, man. You really can't feel much better. What a weekend for the Huskers.
Oh my gosh.
Obviously unfortunate with what went down with Husker women's basketball. You felt the missing of Natalie Potts.
Right.
Nebraska basketball dominates Creighton. Always great to see. Football finally gets it done, and volleyball does what they do. If you were a Husker fan, you had a great weekend.
Got the Husker sweep over Wisconsin, both in volleyball. That was a nice nightcap. But the talk of the town has to be the football team. Saw a lot of good things from Wisconsin. Offense finally came to life. Defense did enough to win, right? Made some big plays, caused some turnovers. In your estimation, what did this win mostly bring to Nebraska?
I think it just brings a sense of just overall exhale for the players, for the fans, for the media of, just finally, right? It was a long 8 years, and it wasn't easy. And the reason I say the media is we feel the fans' pain. I mean, we see it in the comments on Twitter and Facebook and understand the frustration. You can see it from the players. So finally getting that sixth win and doing it over a team that really has had your number for a dozen years, it feels good for the team.
What does that bring in a big picture, being bowl eligible? Because I feel like it's something we just always took for granted for years and years.
Right.
Then going 7 years without going to a bowl game, now it's coming back. I think that's a huge part of that exhale that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it brings more opportunity for things like NIL. I think it helps with recruiting. I think it helps with overall confidence for the team because, a lot of these young guys, take, for example, Dylan Raiola, this is their first season, and they're going bowling in their first season. There's guys that went through the program that hadn't been bowling ever. You look at Ty Robinson, who came back.
Right.
If he didn't come back, he would not have ever made a bowl game with Nebraska. So I think it brings a sense of NIL money. And you heard also Troy Dannon talk about it, too. He said we need to find 6 wins. Said it on Sports Nightly a couple of weeks ago because he's got to sell renovations for the stadium. He's got to make it appealing for people and players and staff and all the other types of stuff to want to come to Nebraska and want to be a part of the football program. They needed to find 6 wins this year. They absolutely had to, and they did.
Needed to find that 6th win also for the fan base. And speaking of the fans, they stormed the field, a very joyous occasion. Everybody was there, including yourself, had only positive things to say. There was more about just celebrating a huge victory. What did you make of that? Of course, there was a couple of national pundits saying, oh, big deal, you won 6 games. Do you really need to storm the field?
Yeah, and you can get that perspective, right? I mean, you look at from the outside, okay, you got the 6 wins, but not every team in the nation has not gone to a bowl game in 8 years. So you understand the joyousness for the crowd. I have a different perspective on it. I was in the middle of it and was getting trampled and knocked into while I was trying to work. And, for me, it's more of a hassle. But, I'm an alum of this school. I understand the joy that brings to the state, to the alumni, to the students as well. So it was cool. I'm pro field storming, anti in the respect that I wasn't totally ready for it to happen.
I'm all for it. I'm more of a fan. I was a fan before I started talking Husker football on this type of a platform. So I was all for it. I loved it. And, if you can't enjoy it, like, what are we doing it for anyway?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you got to 6 wins for the first time in 8 years. We've said that like 3 times already, but it's the reason and the big deal.
Right. And it also came at such an opportune time against a team in Wisconsin that had been beating you up for 10 years now and making you just look bad, winning in goofy fashion, winning in big fashion, embarrassing you on a national stage in a Big Ten championship game. Just all of it was out there. So to slay both of those Dragons in one game, I was all for the storming the field.
Yeah.
But what do you think was a bigger monkey being off the back of Nebraska there? Was it beating Wisconsin finally or finally becoming bowl eligible?
I think for me it's clearly bowl eligibility because that is what kind of defines success is did you play well enough to make it to the postseason? Did you have a winning season? If you have a bowl game, more likely than not, you had a 500 regular season and a chance to end it on a winning season. For some of the players, though, I think there's a case where they might say Wisconsin. I mean, you heard John Bullock talk about it last week. They don't like Wisconsin. Wisconsin doesn't like them. And some of those guys that I think they had rivalries with have moved on when Luke Fickell came in to coach at Wisconsin. But I think for me and the fans and the media, I think it's probably bowl eligibility.
Yeah.
For the team, though, I'm not so sure. There might be a few that think it's Wisconsin.
Right, you can't sidestep some of those rivalries that are built over, a course of 4 and 5 years, on a personal level between the players. The talk has to go to the offense, putting up 44 points. First time we've seen an offensive explosion like that in a very long time. I don't think it can be understated. And Emmett Johnson, let's start right there with him. The running back, 16 carries, 123 yards. What did you see from him that kind of allowed him to have that type of a day?
I think he just had a great first step, and I think that's what Nebraska's running backs have lacked this season, is I think they have not had a quick first step. And when you have a quick first step, Nebraska's offensive line has played really well the last 2 weeks. I've been very impressed with the run blocking that they've created. And I think what you saw from Emmett Johnson also, and Dana Holgorsen mentioned this after the USC game, he hit those holes hard. I mean, he was shot out of a cannon. The other thing was the pass catching ability. I mean, he had over 100 rushing yards, but he also had 85 receiving yards. So career highs in both those categories. The catch and run was really something refreshing. And, with Ramir Johnson, again, not able to play, he was a game time decision. That limits your pass catching ability out of the backfield. Emmett Johnson filled that void tremendously.
And Dowdell still had 3 touchdowns. He had a decent day as well. Kind of used him in that battering ram where I think he feels more comfortable. You also had Ja'Cory Barney, a young man that you talk a lot about. 9 catches, 85 yards. He also moved the ball on the ground a couple of times. You have to point towards some new leadership on the offensive side as far as coaching. Holgorsen has to take a lot of credit for this, doesn't he?
I think so. I mean, you have not seen Nebraska put up 44 points this season. That's their highest scoring total, and the first time they've hit 40 since UTEP. They scored 24 in the first half, highest first half scoring total since Colorado. That's week 1 and week 2. Nebraska had the thump and the physicality that you saw. I mean, you mentioned Dante Dowdell. There seemed to be a very clear hierarchy with the run game, which we didn't have with Marcus Satterfield. Emmett Johnson's your lead back. Dowdell is your guy in the red zone and near the goal line. All 3 of his touchdowns came from within the 20-yard line. That is his bread and butter, and I think that works really well for him because he has such a quick explosiveness.
Right.
I mean, he exploded on that second touchdown right up the middle, similar to what he scored with on the Colorado game in that first touchdown. So I think you're seeing a very clear pattern of Holgorsen's impact. I think he drew up great plays for Ja'Cory Barney. I think the jet sweeps, the slants, the reverses are awesome for him because he's a pass catcher and he's tough and he can take some hits. But I think his best quality is his speed, and I think Dana Holgorsen is starting to figure out, and the offense is finally starting to figure out how to best use that.
Well, we're talking about Holgorsen. Let's go ahead and get a quote from him talking about Emmett Johnson and his emergence.
I think, everything starts up front, so the O-line's doing a good job. Tight ends are doing a good job. I think we're doing a good job as a staff of scheming things. And then just, give him as much credit as the rest of them. I mean, he's gaining confidence. He's been put in that role and he's taken advantage of his opportunity. I don't know what the touches were before I was here. I didn't go back and look at that. I watched all the video, but I didn't study touches or anything, but he's certainly taken advantage of this opportunity. He goes in there and he's a difference maker. He was the offensive player of the week last week and played well. So just to give him credit for the amount of work that he's putting in and the attitude that he has. He's a great young man. Proud of him for how he's been playing. He's been a huge spark here the last 2 weeks.
Well, he's just kind of saying what everyone was thinking, but saying it and doing it is 2 different things.
Yeah, and Emmett did it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is 2 weeks in a row where he's had his 2 best games of the season, so it's going to be really important again against this weekend against Iowa. I mean, I think this is going to be a game where it's cold, it's chilly. I want to see a heavy dose of Emmett Johnson and Dante Dowdell.
What cannot be lost is our freshman quarterback. He looked comfortable again. 28 of 38 for nearly 300 yards passing, a touchdown. Probably more important than that touchdown pass, no interceptions.
Yeah.
What did you make of Raiola's performance?
Much more in system, much more in rhythm. It looked like the Raiola we saw in the first couple of weeks of the season. I don't think he made that many tough throws that I think we saw him make maybe in week 1, week 2, but he didn't really need to. I think Dana Holgorsen did a nice job not forcing the issue. taking what Wisconsin was giving Nebraska. I think there were a couple of times he didn't get the best effort from his receivers. I think Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nayor both had really good plays, but I also think they had plays where they gave up a little bit. Banks won most of his one-on-ones, which I think when he's winning those one-on-one battles really helps out with Dylan Raiola trying to find him in space. Isaiah Nayor dropped one in the end zone, a perfectly thrown ball, and that was one of those deep balls that we had talked about. So he looked more in rhythm, looked more in system, would have liked to see him get a little more production from his 2 veteran wideouts, but overall looked much more comfortable, much more like himself.
Well, let's go ahead and hear from the young man, our quarterback, and speaking specifically about his comfortability, really, under Holgorsen.
It was really helpful. Just kind of building that relationship, kind of understanding what he wants to call, when he wants to call it, and just being around him. I think for everyone on the offense got more comfortable, and you could kind of see that as we kept progressing throughout the game.
Well, okay, he's looks more comfortable. No surprise. Says he's more comfortable. I think it's very obvious.
Sounds more comfortable, too. I mean, I just got a vibe this week from Dylan and Coach Rule and everybody that went to the podium at the press conferences. It just feels like there's a giant weight off the shoulders. And I think for everybody, it's partially 6 wins. For guys like Raiola and Coach Rule, it's that they trust the offense now. And I don't, not to say that Dylan Raiola didn't trust Marcus Satterfield. I think he did because he's that coachable. But I think he really trusts getting results from Dana Holgorsen.
Well, and even Coach Rule has mentioned it feels like we got our swagger back, and that's how they're carrying themselves and things of that nature. And, you know, what a whirlwind it's been these last couple of weeks where now we're talking about the defensive struggles, and there were some, if we're being honest. I think you have to start with what we figured to be one of our strengths in the secondary. Gave up some plays where receivers were getting behind them.
Yeah, and Nebraska was thin at the secondary. Tommy Hill's shutting it down for the year, right? I mean, we know that for a fact that he's not going to come back. Has a foot injury. I believe he's playing with plantar fasciitis. And that's a guy that at the beginning of the year was projected to be a first-round pick. So it's tough to swallow. You don't want to see him step away from the program, but you understand it, right? The other thing is, I think Nebraska had a lot of guys in that secondary that were under the weather. Tony White talked about it this week with Sierra Wright. He was playing sick and still played almost 50 snaps. So these guys, I think, were trying to just basically make it through the game. I will say this, though, about the secondary. There is one guy that I have not been impressed with this season. I hate to say it. I mean, I know he's got 7 interceptions. Malcolm Hartzog has not had a good season. I think he is starting to see the lack of size and the lack of speed kind of catch up to him. I think he got away with that against a few teams and schedules that Nebraska had the past few years, but he has not had a quick first step, which when you don't have a first quick step, especially in one-on-ones, you're losing them. And we talked about that last week. I think there's a lot of blown coverages, but I also think guys like Malcolm Hartzog have missed some blown coverages and have gotten beat one-on-one. So I'd like to see him again this week against Iowa and the bowl game, try to stay more toe-to-toe with the receiver. I don't know how much Iowa's going to throw the ball. When they do, they haven't had a ton of success, so maybe this is a get-back week for Hartzog in the secondary.
Something that helps all secondary members, whether it's the safeties or the corners, is that front 7. And I thought the front 7 played really, really good against Wisconsin. And then you can point towards the big guys up front, the front 4, Ty Robinson, Nash Hutmaker, those guys came to play, but it feels like they're going to have to take it to just another level against Iowa. What does the Nebraska defense have to do to slow down this rushing attack from the Iowa Hawkeyes?
Starts with stopping Caleb Johnson. In my opinion, he's the best back in the Big Ten and maybe one of the best backs in the nation. I mean, he has been a wrecking ball. 6.7 yards per attempt. That is why Iowa is the #1 rushing offense in the Big Ten and top 20 nationally as well. You got to try and figure out a way to make them throw the ball. I would play this game very similar to how you played Wisconsin. Tawee Walker got loose a couple of times, but for the most part, I can't remember many times where he was bursting one down the middle or down the sidelines. I think you stack the box, try to make whoever they run out there at quarterback throw the football, and try and take the run game away as much as possible. Big plays are going to happen in the run game. They're going to have long drives. It's going to happen. I don't see this being a 44-25 type game. I think it's going to be low scoring. Big plays are going to happen in the run game. Long drives are going to happen. Bend, don't break, and try to not let 4, 5, 6 big run plays happen.
I was 5-0 when Caleb Johnson has over 100 yards or more. So that's what they're going to have to do. And I feel like it's almost playing into Nebraska's hands where it's strength on strength. You know, it's not a high-profile quarterback that's going to be able to get over top of a banged-up secondary. No, where our strength is on defense are our down linemen, and it's going to fall on their shoulders. And I think if you're a Nebraska fan, you feel like that's our best bet. We got to welcome it this Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and I think that means you got to have big games from guys like Jamari Butler and obviously Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmaker. And you think you should, because coming into the season, I think Nebraska's biggest strength, a lot of people pointed to the defensive line spot and the quarterback, offensively and defensively. Those guys, Ty Robinson's been great. I mean, he's got 6 sacks on the season. He's got a lot of tackles. He's forced a fumble. I think those guys got to build a wall. And, you know, Iowa's got a good offensive line, too. I mean, that's part of why Caleb Johnson's been so strong. So it's going to be a big challenge. I think this is the game. If there's one on the schedule you pointed to where the defensive line needs to play their best, it's this weekend.
Gut check type of a game. And, of course, it's on Black Friday. Once again, well, we got to get into it. What's your prediction?
You know, people are not going to like this. I think I got Iowa by a little over a score. I'm going to go 23-14 Hawkeyes. I see this being a game, though, that's much more competitive. Like, I see this being a one-score game until maybe a minute or two left, and maybe Iowa gets a late field goal to somewhat put the icing on the cake. But it's going to be cold. I do worry a little bit about Dylan Raiola in this game playing in the cold because he really hasn't had a chance to. I mean, he's been in Arizona and Georgia for most of his high school days, and he really hasn't had a cold game yet this season. It was not warm on Saturday, but it was pleasant for late November, right, against Wisconsin. We're talking maybe 20 degrees at kickoff. That is a world different from kicking off at about 55 like it was this past weekend. So I don't know how he's going to respond to that. And I think you got a good run game, but Iowa's at home, night game, great run game.
Sure.
I think there's just enough there that they'll be able to pull out a win.
Yeah, you know, I can speak for myself as a Husker fan. I don't like that prediction at all. So I got to go the other way here, Jake. 27-24, the Huskers pull it off. Special teams has quietly really turned things around here. And how many losses has Nebraska had over the years by 3 points at the end to Iowa or Wisconsin?
Yeah.
That was a huge win, a huge weight. You could feel it in the stadium last week. Now these players know that they can do it. They should have the confidence they can do it. I'm taking Nebraska by a late field goal, late in the game. You're more spot on with the bookkeepers here. I think Nebraska's about a 6-point underdog here, and that makes sense. But I think Nebraska's playing with so much confidence, and so many things are kind of lining up. The offense, defensive line, special teams finally getting back into a rhythm, making some kicks. Bushimi back on track, right? I think that's going to loom large in this game. And our offense does feel like it's found something with the new offensive coordinator.
There is something to be said for road teams in this rivalry. And since the Heroes Trophy was enacted, the road team has actually had a better record than the last time Nebraska beat Iowa, 2022 at Kinnick Stadium.
Well, Jake, I got to thank you for hopping on board with us once again and sharing all that wonderful information. And thank you for watching another episode of Nebraska Football Now. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.